الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا حبيبي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آلك وصحبك يا رحمة للعالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh to Maulana and to all the participants.
Waalaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome to tonight's session. And like I said, due to load shedding and all the challenges, I'm handing over directly to Maulana to continue, inshallah. Tafadhal, Maulana.
Jazakallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. Wal awwal wal akhir wal zahir wal batin wa huwa bi kulli shay'in alim. Amma ba'd fa a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu innamal mushrikuna najas. Sadaqallahul azim. Sallallahu ala nabiyil ummi wa alihi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Salatu wa salamun alayka ya Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. My dear respected viewers and listeners, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our cherisher and our sustainer, and choices of durood and salam be upon his beloved, our master arwahuna fida Sayyidina Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, today we will be discussing the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and it is important for us to understand his genealogy, to understand his background, and also to understand what is our aqidah with regard to the entire ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, right from Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam all the way to his beloved father, Hazrat Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, what we need to understand is that there are many verses of the Holy Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam that indicate to us, firstly, with regard to the iman and the purity and the piety and the virtues of the blessed lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And I'll just discuss a few of those, and then we will discuss briefly the lives of his blessed father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather, if time permits, inshallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَلَعَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ. So it is clear in the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that a slave man who believes is better than an unbeliever. So no matter what position an unbeliever might have in this dunya, even if a Muslim is a slave, he still has a higher rank in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, higher status in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than an unbeliever. And Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam has mentioned in the hadith that I was sent from amongst the best of families in every generation until the generation in which I was born. So already from this we can understand that if Huzur alayhi salam was born in the best of the generations, and the Holy Quran tells us that even a slave who is a Muslim is better than an unbeliever, this already tells us that every single generation in the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, they were all Muslims and they were all believers, as we can understand from the words of Huzur alayhi salam and from the verse of the Holy Quran. And in another hadith, Huzur alayhi salam mentioned that in every generation there are always present at least 7 Muslims, and if they are not present, then the dwellers of the earth would perish. So we can see from this that in every generation there are at least 7 Muslims on this earth, and Huzur alayhi salam mentioned that in every generation he was from the best of that generation, meaning even from these at least 7 Muslims that were in every generation, Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam's ancestry, his ancestors, they were from the best of those 7 Muslims. So in every era, the best personality that you would find in that era, that would be the forefather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And indeed, that would be a Muslim and not an unbeliever, or not a mushrik or an idol worshipper. So this we can understand from the words of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam himself. Now, the verse that I recited from the Holy Quran at the start, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu innamal mushrikuna najas. O you who believe, truly the idol worshippers are impure, they are najas. And in the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always transferred me from one pure and sacred generation to another. When this pure and sacred generation gave birth to two branches, then I was born from the better of those two branches. Again, when we look at the Holy Quran and the words of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, we can understand that anyone that was impure was not part of the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, because the Holy Quran says that an unbeliever is impure. And Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam mentioned that his every generation was pure and sacred. So from this we can understand that every single ancestor of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam was indeed a believer, and they were indeed pak, they were indeed pure. And if they were pure, then that means they couldn't have been unbelievers, and they couldn't have been idol worshippers, as we learn from the Holy Quran. Therefore, every single personality through whom the Noor Muhammadi sallallahu ta'ala wasallam had transferred from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam right till the time of Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala an, every single person was a believer, every single person was a muwahid, a Muslim, a believer in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single person was a pious person, a virtuous person, a pure person, and someone who was the best in that generation. Subhanallah. And why would it not be so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam in every way that we can imagine, and even in ways that we cannot imagine? And how would Rasulullah sallallahu, how would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow the Noor of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, that pure Noor of Huzur alayhi salam, to pass through anyone or anything that would be najas or that would be impure? This would be against the shan and the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So we can understand from this that every single personality through whom the Noor of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam had passed, that personality was pure, he was a believer, and they were pious and virtuous personalities. And again, not only from the male side, but even from the female side, from the maternal ancestry, because Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam mentioned that I was always transferred from the backs of pure males to the wombs of pure females. Subhanallah. So again, Huzur alayhi salam clarified to us that not only, because sometimes people might think that the Noor might have been transferred, yes, from the paternal side, from pure personalities, but maybe on the maternal side there might have been some idol worshippers, ma'azallah, etc. As some people say that the parents of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam were idol worshippers, ma'azallah. We can understand from these verses of the Holy Quran and the hadith of Huzur alayhi salam that every single one of them were pure and pak, and they were all believers. And even here in this hadith, Huzur alayhi salam mentioned that he was always transferred from the backs of pure males to the wombs of pure females. So here he clarified that not only from the paternal side, but even from the maternal side, every single person was pure, they were pak, they were virtuous personalities, they were pious personalities. So the entire ancestry, the entire lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, right from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, you find that every single personality was a believer, every single personality was pious, every single personality was virtuous, and they were the best of that creation of that time. They were the best of that generation. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is, in this day and age, there are many people that are spreading false beliefs and creating fitna and mischief by saying that, ma'azallah, the parents of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam were mushrik. And we need to understand what is our aqeedah supposed to be with regard to not only his parents, but the entire ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. Because remember, there were times where, from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam till the time of the birth of Huzur alayhi salam, there were times where there were prophets on this dunya. There were times through which his Noor passed through prophets. But there were also times where there was no prophet on the dunya. So there were periods in which, between the period of when two prophets took place, then in that period in between there were no prophets. And a lot of jihalat and ignorance had spread during that time. A lot of strife, a lot of evil, a lot of sins were taking place. And we need to understand that even during these periods, at that time, even though there was no prophet, but those personalities through whom the Nur-e-Muhammadi was passing, they were always virtuous and pious personalities, even though there was no Nabi at that time, even though there was a lot of fitna and sins and strife continuing at that time, but still the Nur-e-Muhammadi always passed through virtuous and pious individuals. So this is very important for us to understand that throughout the history of mankind from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, the Nur-e-Muhammadi always passed through virtuous and pious personalities that were all believers. And none of them in the entire ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam were mushriks or non-believers. So now that we understand the belief with regard to the iman of the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, let us just, for blessing's sake, listen to the names of 21 generations of the paternal side of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And there are many hadith where Huzur alayhi salam has mentioned by name his own ancestry. And he always went up to 21 generations. Whenever he mentioned them by name, he went up to 21 generations. And for barakat's sake, I will narrate this hadith so that we can understand and listen to the names of his ancestry. And remember, every single one of these names I'm mentioning, they were all Muslim, they were all believers in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they were the best of the creation of that time. They were the best of the generation of that time. So Huzur alayhi salam said in the hadith, I am Muhammad, son of Abdullah, son of Abdul Muttalib, son of Hashim, son of Abdul Munaf, son of Qusay, son of Kilab, son of Marra, son of Ka'b, son of Lawi, son of Ghalib, son of Fahr, son of Malik, son of An-Nadr, son of Kinana, son of Khuzaima, son of Mudraka, son of Nazar, son of Ma'ad, son of Adnan. So these are the 21 generations that Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam mentioned in the hadith of his own ancestry. So we understand and learn about his ancestry from himself. And these are the names in the sequence that he had mentioned in the hadith. And after mentioning these 21 names, he mentions a very important point for us to understand again the piety and the virtues of his entire ancestry. And Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam, after mentioning these names, he said that never at any time when people were divided into two groups that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make me from the better of the two. And I was born from my parents in a state that was pure from all evils of the years of ignorance, and I was born from a pure valid nikah. Subhanallah. All my ancestors from Nabi Adam alayhi salam till my parents were the pure and best of people on the earth, and my father was the best of fathers amongst you. Subhanallah. So there are various points about our own aqidah that we learn with regard to the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam from this one hadith. And this narration is from Bayhaqi Sharif. So firstly, apart from the names of Huzur alayhi salam's ancestry that we learn, he has clarified a very important point for us, that his entire lineage, and especially he says, I was born from my parents in a state that was pure from all evils. So already he's clarifying the status and the maqam of his parents, the honor of his parents, that they were free from any type of evil. So they did not engross themselves in any type of sin, even though they were in a period, living in a period of ignorance, the period of jihalat, where there was a lot of sins taking place around them in the Arab Peninsula. But even then, they were pure and they were free from these sins. And then he mentions that he was born from a pure and valid nikah. Subhanallah. So remember, when there's any period of ignorance, then due to the ignorance, there is a lot of sin that spreads in that era. And one of the biggest sins and most common sins that happens due to this is the sin of zina, fornication. And Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam clarifies this in this hadith, that even though it was the period of ignorance, but he was born from a pure and a valid nikah. So his parents, ma'azallah, did not commit any fornication, even though they lived in a in an era of sin, in an era of ignorance, but they made nikah and he was born from a valid nikah. And then he also mentions that from the time of Nabi Adam alayhi salam till his own parents, they were the purest and the best of the people on the earth of that time. And he mentions a very important point about his own father, the maqam of his father. And he says that my father was the best of fathers amongst you. Subhanallah. So what will we understand the maqam of Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala and the best father of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, when Huzur alayhi salam himself has mentioned that he is the best amongst the fathers amongst you. So these are the important points that we learn with regard to the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And then just one more hadith before I go into the details of some of his lineage and their life history. Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam mentioned in the hadith that verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for my nikah only women from the Ahl Jannah. So Huzur alayhi salam is clarifying with regard to those women folk that have come into his nikah, that these are such personalities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained that these are only women from the Ahl Jannah. So there is no impure woman, there is no idol worshipper, there is no mushrik, there is no disbeliever that came into the nikah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of them were women from the Ahl Jannah. Now, this is very important to understand, because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow a woman who is impure to come into the nikah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to have that kind of a relationship with someone that is impure or is sinful or that has bad character, etc., how would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow the Noor-e Muhammadi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pass through someone who is impure? So again, we understand from this hadith how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when he would not even allow a woman who is impure to come into his nikah and just to have an association with him, how would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow his noor, the noor of his beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to pass through a physical personality who is impure? So again, this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored his beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to show us that this is his unique excellence, that whoever his noor passes through, irrespective of which era it is, irrespective of how much jihalat is taking place during that time, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is such a unique and honored personality that whoever through whom his noor is passing, even those personalities become elevated in status and honor, and even they become elevated in piety and in virtue, and they become the best of creation of that time. They become the best of generations just because of having the nisbat of having the Noor-e Muhammadi pass through them. Subhanallah. So this is the shan, this is the honor of the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam. Now briefly, just a few minutes to understand the character of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his blessed father. So we start with Sayyidina Hashim radiallahu ta'ala and his great-grandfather. Now we all know him as Hashim, but his actual name is Amr. And we will understand now how he got the title of Hashim. Hashim is actually his title, but he became so well known by that we know him to be Hazrat Hashim radiallahu ta'ala, but his actual name is Amr. And he was a very pious individual, and he was very brave, and he was very hospitable, and he was very generous. And it is mentioned that during his time in the Arab Peninsula, there was a very severe drought that had broken out, and people were fighting for every little grain that they could get to eat. This is how severe the famine became. This is how scarce food became. And Hazrat Hashim traveled all the way to Syria, where he went and purchased bread, and he came back, traveled back to Makkah, and he then slaughtered camels and made sarid. And this is a soup kind of a dish with meat and bread in it. And he took all of that bread that he had bought from Syria, he broke it into pieces, and he put it into this sarid, and he then distributed this amongst the Hajis, amongst the pilgrims, and amongst the people of Makkah of that time. And because of his generosity and because of this act of his, where he traveled all the way to Syria just to make sure that people in Makkah had food. He was given this title of Hashim. Hashim means the one who divides bread into pieces. This is what Hashim means. And because this is what he did, he went all the way to Syria, he bought so much of bread, came back, and he broke this into pieces and put it into the sarid and distributed it. From then, people started to call him Hashim. And this is how he got the title of Hashim, and this is what we know him as, Hazrat Hashim radiallahu ta'ala, but his actual name is Amr. So this is the character and the shan of the great grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And he passed away at the age of 25, which is also the age at which the blessed father of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam had passed away. So remember, Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala passed away at 25, and the great grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, Hazrat Hashim, also passed away at the age of 25. But the grandfather of Huzur al-Islam, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala an, he passed away at the age of 120. Subhanallah. So then we move on to understand some of the aspects with regard to Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, who is the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. He is the personality who actually initially started worshipping inside the Ghar Hira. So he was the one that discovered it. He used to go into the Ghar Hira and he used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, when people want to point fingers at the blessed parents of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, this is the character, this is the kind of personalities that the grandfather, the great grandfather, the ancestry of Huzur al-Islam were, that even they were engrossed in ibadat, even they were generous towards the people, even they were hospitable towards the people, and they used to engross themselves in ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, he used to go to the Ghar Hira and he used to take a little bit of food and drink with him, and he used to make ibadat in the Ghar Hira. And even when Ramadan came, then he used to go and sit in itikaf in the Ghar Hira, the cave of Hira. And we can see that this is later on in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. He also used to go and sit and make ibadat in the cave of Hira. So this is something that his grandfather used to do. And Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, he was such a personality because of the nur that emanated from his blessed forehead. He was so much filled with nur, and his entire body used to emanate the fragrance of musk. Subhanallah. And even though he lived in an era before the Shariat of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, but he used to do things and believe in things that later on actually formed part of the Shariat of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So he used to regard he used to regard zina, fornication and alcohol as being absolutely haram. And even when it came to stealing, he used to cut off the hands of those people who used to steal. And he used to prevent people from burying their daughters. Subhanallah. So these are those qualities which we see that in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala wasallam, this is what he used to do. He used to prevent people from burying their daughters. And he used to, in the Sharia, he mentioned that for stealing, one's hand would be cut off. And he also mentioned that it is haram to commit fornication, to commit zina, and to drink alcohol. And these were the things that during the period of ignorance, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu anhu, he used to have these kind of beliefs, and this is what he used to propagate amongst the people. Subhanallah. And also he was that personality, he used to feed birds. And eventually he received the title Mut'imut Tayr, the feeder of birds, the one who feeds birds. So today when people are feeding birds, often we find that people in front of their shops or in their gardens, they put grain or bread, etc. to feed birds. This is actually the sunnah of the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So the next time any of us are feeding the birds, we must make this intention that not only we are feeding the makhluk, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we are following the sunnah of the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. This was a special trait of his through which he got the title of Mut'imut Tayr. And he was also responsible for the well of Zamzam. He was the custodian of the well of Zamzam. And it was during his time that the incident of the Ashab Fil took place, where the king of Yemen at that time, Abraha, where he sent, this was around 55 days before the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, where he sent an army of elephants in an attempt to destroy the Holy Kaaba. I won't go into the details of that incident. It's very well known, and because of time, I'm not going to go into the details of that incident. But it happened during the time of Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala an. So these are some of the characteristics of the grandfather of Huzur al-Islam, and he was very well respected amongst the Arabs of that time, especially by the Quraysh. And it is mentioned that whenever a calamity used to take place, whenever there used to be a severe drought, the people, the Quraysh, they used to take Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, they used to take him to a high mountain, and there they used to make dua using the wasila of Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. Subhanallah. They actually used to use him as a wasila in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make dua. And through his blessing, the duas used to get accepted, and they used to get relief from their calamities. So this is something that was taking place, using a wasila was taking place even at that time. And Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala himself used to be the wasila through whom other people's duas used to get accepted. So this is the shan of the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam. Then we move on to the blessed father of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam, Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala. Now he was that personality who was absolutely handsome, and he was so beautiful because of the Noor Muhammadi that was illuminating his blessed countenance, his blessed face that was shining through his forehead. He was so beautiful that all of the females, the most beautiful girls of that time wanted to marry him because of his beauty. But his father, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, he did not just want someone that was beautiful for his son. He wanted someone that was also pious. He wanted someone that had good character, and he wanted someone that came from a good and respectable home and a respectable family. So this is the type of personality he was looking for his son. And from all of his sons, Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu anhu was the most beloved to him. And obviously so, because this was the son through whom the Noor Muhammadi sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam was illuminating. So Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala anh, because in him there were many of the characteristics found, many of the signs found that he was going to be the father of the final messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Jews of Syria of that time, when they looked through their scriptures, they were well versed in their scriptures, in the ancient scriptures. And when they looked through the scriptures and looked at the signs that were given, and they looked at the life of Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala, they realized that he is going to be the father of the final messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they tried to kill him on several occasions, and they tried to assassinate him, but every time they were unsuccessful. Eventually, at one point, Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala, he went into the jungles to hunt, on a hunting expedition. And when he went into the jungle, the Jews, they sent an entire army in order to kill Hazrat Abdullah. And when that army came to attack him in the jungle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a creation from out of this world. That creation does not exist in this dunya of ours. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent that creature to come and defend Hazrat Abdullah. And that creature then drove away those Jews, and eventually that creature took Hazrat Abdullah and brought him safely back into the home of Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala an. So this was the shan of Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself protected the entire, not only Hazrat Abdullah, but the entire lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, the entire ancestry, because this was the ancestry through whom the final messenger was going to physically appear onto this earth. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala from being killed by the Jews. And when this incident took place in this jungle, then Wahab bin Munaf, he was present in the jungle at that time. And when he saw this entire incident, he became very impressed with Hazrat Abdullah. And he started to have a liking towards him. And he then made mashwara with his friends and his family members. And he then sent a proposal to Hazrat Abdul Muttalib for the son, for his son, Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu anhu, for his own daughter. And his daughter was Sayyidah Amina radiallahu ta'ala anha. So she was that personality who had all of the characteristics and the trait that Hazrat Abdul Muttalib was looking for in a daughter-in-law and a suitable wife for Hazrat Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala. And when he received the proposal and he saw the traits and the characteristics in her, then he immediately accepted the proposal. And at the age of 24, when Hazrat Abdullah was 24 years old, the nikah was made with Hazrat Sayyidah Amina radiallahu ta'ala anha. And after the nikah, the nur was transferred from Hazrat Abdullah to Hazrat Bibi Amina radiallahu anha. And approximately after 2 months of them making nikah, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib then sent his son on an expedition. In some narration, it is mentioned that he was sent to Madinatul Munawwara to purchase dates. In other narrations, it is mentioned that he was sent to Syria on a business trip. But in this journey that he embarked on, eventually he became sick and ill. And on his return to home, before he could reach home, he passed away. And he made parada from this dunya, and he was only 25 years old when he passed away. So before Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam was even born, then he became orphan and he did not have a father. So this is the shan, this is the brief history of the lineage and the ancestry of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he grants us the tawfiq and the hidayat to increase our knowledge about Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, increase our knowledge relating to everything about Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, especially his family members, his blessed wives, his blessed children, his blessed ancestry, his companions, etc. And may we increase practicing upon the sunnah and the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المؤمنين والمؤمنات إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. جزاكم الله.
Jazakallah to Maulana as well. Really appreciate it. I know Maulana is traveling. Allah Pak keep you safe where you are and keep us all safe and keep us to us, inshallah. Jazakallah to all the participants. Inshallah, we'll meet again next week. Shukran jazeelan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.